You'd hear them before you ever saw them. Engines howling somewhere beyond the edge of Moscow. The first time I discovered the drag racers, early in my career covering Russia more than 20 years ago, it felt like I'd stepped onto the set of The Fast and the Furious.
This was Moscow's underground street racing scene, a wild mix of people buzzing around in beat-up but beloved Ladas and other souped-up old cars.
By day, they blended in. By night, they'd gather in secret locations, tear down hundreds of meters of tarmac before melting back into the city before sunrise.
But there emerged another, more brazen kind of street racer in Moscow, the kind that doesn't wait until night. Ones who speed through the city under the sun, right under the nose of the police.
They're Moscow's super rich, and they know no one will stop them.
Not because they're fast, but because, some say, they're protected.
One of them was thin with coiffed blonde hair, Maxim Yakubets. But Maxim wasn't driving Ladas. His ride of choice was a Lamborghini, wrapped in day-glow yellow and grey camouflage. Racing through Moscow, not for the thrills, but to show who owned the road. Like nothing could touch him.
Maxim wasn't afraid of being seen. In fact, he was easy to find. He and his crew regularly posted on social media videos of them racing through Moscow in an array of flashy cars, posing with stacks of cash, even playing with a pet lion cub.
In 2017, Maxim had just turned 30 and he was about to get married again.
But this wasn't some quiet second chance. It was held at an exclusive golf course north of Moscow. I walked it myself some years later with the manager, who told me the price of renting the course for a day was a cool $250,000.
For this wedding, there was no expense spared. Staff directed VIP guests to walk over the perfectly manicured turf to a giant pavilion decked out like an imperial palace. Its white facade was brilliant against the dark green forest backdrop.
They climbed a wide set of steps to a veranda overlooking the course. Servers in black ties circulated under chandeliers.
Inside, a spectacular ballroom, matching peony bouquets the size of trees.
But that was only half of the story.
After dinner, the lights dropped. Dancers emerged, lasers flared, and Russian pop icons took to the stage.
This shrine to tradition transforming into a modern, dazzling dance floor.
We called the wedding planner to find out more about this extravagant affair. They didn't want to talk. We tracked down others who worked at the wedding. We were told they'd signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. They couldn't talk either.
But the wedding planner left dozens of images online. And if you flick through them, straight away you can spot there's something off. Look closely. There's the bride in her white strapless gown, looking thoughtfully into the sunlit distance.
Here's one in black and white, classy. She's seated at a vanity table, the long train of her dress billowing behind her.
Now she's gazing up at her groom on the darkened dance floor.
Curiously, Maxim's face is harder to make out. A dramatic drone shot filmed directly above them shows the couple walking hand in hand through tall trees.
A wide shot catches the groom in the distance as the lens focuses on the father of the bride.
One from the side has Maxim's face in shadow as he and the bride sink a knife into a cake that's as tall as they are.
Why so shy, Maxim?
Perhaps there's a hint in the vanity license plate on his neon Lamborghini. Vor. That's Russian for thief.
A joke, perhaps? Or a blatant admission?
Maxim Yakubets of Moscow, Russia, has been indicted in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for his alleged role as the leader of a cyber criminal gang.
So perhaps that outlandish wedding is more than a celebration of love. Maybe it's a brazen display of stolen wealth.
Maxim Yakubets is a true 21st century criminal who, with the stroke of a key and the click of a mouse, committed cybercrimes across the globe. He's earned his place on the FBI's list of the world's most wanted cyber criminals.
So that might explain his newfound bashfulness.
We're pleased to announce a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to the arrest and or conviction of Russian cybercriminal Maxim Yakubets.
That's the kind of money they put up for war criminals and terrorists, even some of North Korea's hackers.
And if you've listened to the Lazarus heist, you know what they're capable of.
Yakubets and the members of his criminal network devised and implemented the kinds of criminal schemes so audacious and sophisticated that they would be difficult to imagine if they were not real.
For years now, Maxim Yakubets has evaded arrest. But he isn't just hard to catch. He's not meant to be caught.
He's said to be living under the kind of protection that most criminals can only dream of.
Protection, some say, that comes with strings attached.
Though others tell a different story. Here we go. I'm looking for Maxim Yakubets. I'm from the BBC.
There is no Maxim Yakubets here. He hasn't been here for 15 years.
I have to say my heart was thumping. As the BBC's cyber correspondent, I've been trying to track down Maxim Yakubets for years. And in 2021, I travelled to Moscow in search of him, winding up at his dad's front door.
Look, Maxim is not here. I'm his father.
Viktor Yakubets, in the flesh.
Yep, green t-shirt, blue jeans, gold chain, gold ring, gold watch, bald head. How do you think your son has become so rich?
Who said he was rich?
How did he afford the $600,000 wedding?
How much? Firstly, this is slightly exaggerated.
Only slightly. It'd take the average Russian a lifetime, maybe more, to make anything like that kind of money.
You seem very upset by the US and the UK's accusations.
Of course I am upset. They created a problem for the family, for many people who know us. What was the purpose?
But back then, you were only on the trail of Maxim.
That's right. And meeting his father was the closest I got. But 3 years later, in October of 2024, there was a twist. The British government accused some of Maxim's own family,
Artem Yakubets, Edward,
including his father.
Viktor Yakubets.
I was amazed. Viktor, apparently part of the criminal empire too.
And not just the father. Maxim's brother, cousins, and his father-in-law were all implicated. Many of them were standing alongside Maxim at that Moscow wedding, in tuxedos.
Big brother Artem, bald as his dad.
To his left, cousin Kirill, short, with a beard and wavy hair.
Cousin Dmitri, taller, with a little less facial hair.
Those wedding photos now look less like a family album, more like a police lineup.
They ran their operations out of the back of an Italian restaurant in Moscow, in the back room, just like you would see Tony Soprano do. They really viewed themselves as the new mafioso.
These are the blood ties said to bind an alleged global hacking empire, with thousands of victims around the world, emptying bank accounts and upending lives.
Crimes that live up to this criminal crew's chosen name, Evil Corps.
When you look at the Evil Corps group, they were really one of the beginning godfathers, so to speak.
I'm Joe Tidy, the BBC's cyber correspondent. I spend my time chasing the world's most dangerous hackers.
And I'm Sarah Rainsford. I was Moscow correspondent for the BBC until I was expelled. They claimed I was a security threat.
We've teamed up because if you want to understand cybercrime and you want to understand modern Russia, you need to understand Evil Corps.
They're not just part of cybercrime history, they are that history. Accused of stealing hundreds of millions of dollars and working for the Russian state.
Cybercrime, state power, and a life lived beyond the law.
This is Cyberhack, Season 3, Evil Corps, from the BBC World Service. Episode 1, Zeus. 30 years ago, this screeching handshake was how you got online. Slow and clunky, but it still felt like the future.
Lawrence Baldwin was a network engineer working for a big American telecoms company. With this cumbersome connection process, the security risks he's tasked with managing at the time seemed minimal. His motto, what could possibly go wrong?
But Lawrence begins to see the landscape shift as the new century rolls in and the broadband era begins. The world's becoming more connected, and we all start spending more of our lives online.
You'd install a firewall on your ADSL connection and, it would light up like a Christmas tree in 2 seconds after connecting. And it's like, what the heck are these guys trying to do?
Each light on his firewall, that Christmas tree, is a silent alarm. They're alerts that attackers are testing the digital locks, trying to break in. But why?
It really upset me that I would see this activity and have 10 years of network analysis experience. And I was like, I have no idea what the goal is even here. And that's what spawned the pressure on me to basically ultimately try to answer that question.
Lawrence is seeing more than mischief. He's seeing the first signs of an emerging underworld, criminals crawling beneath the surface of the internet, looking for opportunities to steal as much money as possible.
And it hits a nerve. This is not just technical, it's personal.
I get very triggered by injustice.
Something in him needs to act.
I set out with my primary mission, driving what I do, to disrupt cyber criminals.
So Lawrence quits his job and he starts a cybersecurity firm, MyNet Watchman.
There's not a lot of people that would just put all their life's focus on something without having any concept on how am I going to pay the bills?
3 decades on, Lawrence has morphed from network engineer to cybersecurity legend. He's been called a dark hero of the internet. He doesn't just prevent problems, he infiltrates criminal organizations.
I actually, in a way, began thinking like a criminal.
He almost never gives interviews, and he's never spoken publicly about his part in the hunt for Maxim Yakubiets, until now.
Summer 2009. Lawrence is already the guy banks call when hackers strike. He's got the FBI on speed dial.
And he's about to find out what happens when you mess with a god.
He's on the trail of a group of cybercriminals using a bit of malware code named after the Greek god of thunder, Zeus. Malware is malicious software that hackers use to gain control of a computer. It's hidden behind those dodgy links we're always told to be suspicious of.
And Lawrence has discovered they're using it to steal money from a string of victims across the US, stretching from coast to coast.
An auto body shop in Georgia.
A plastics company in Pennsylvania.
A Native American tribe in Washington state.
Even an order of Franciscan nuns in Chicago.
Nuns?
Nuns.
Lawrence's intro to this investigation starts with a tip. A colleague's got hold of a sample of the Zeus code, and he spots something. It looks like a reference to a server, or central computer, which the criminals use to chat to each other.
Within minutes, I start taking a look at what's going on.
Sure enough, there is a server where messages are pinging back and forth, live.
To get a closer look, Lawrence applies a packet sniffer, a tool that network engineers use to monitor online traffic.
You're the cyber correspondent, I'll let you explain packet sniffer.
Well, if you think of a packet sniffer like a nosy postal worker, they read every letter that passes through the mail sorting facility, whereas normal postal workers just see envelopes and addresses. A packet sniffer will be able to read everything, unless the letters are protected, written in some indecipherable code, for example.
And to Lawrence's surprise, these hackers are pretty complacent. None of the messages he sees online are encrypted.
So not only could I see this server, within minutes I could actually see the full transcript of all of the chat communications. That's when my Zeus nightmare began.
As the criminals are talking, Lawrence is watching.
It's as if he's stepped invisible into the backroom office of a cybercrime syndicate.
Most of the messages he sees are in Russian. Lawrence doesn't speak Russian, but there are a few words and phrases he recognizes, and he begins to make some sense of what's going on.
Much of what he sees appears to be people talking back and forth.
But they're also sharing lots of names and numbers, and then he sees reams of bank details.
Lawrence feels his pulse rise.
And then it was like, almost like a panic, because I'm gonna have to build something that ingests this data and puts it into a format that I can triage it myself.
Lawrence begins his triage operation, processing all this data that's flowing by in real time, not to mention some basic translation from Russian so that he can better understand it all.
Soon the conversations he's tapped into start to make a lot more sense.
Hey, I just did the fraudulent transaction. I've moved $200,000 out of the victim's bank account. And here's the victim's name. And then here is where I sent the money to. And there would be a laundry list of individuals' names and bank account numbers and dollar amounts, essentially documenting the details of the fraudulent transaction.
Behind all the detail about victims, names, addresses, bank account numbers, there are real people losing real money. But the criminals are ghosts. Lawrence gets to know them only by their online handles. Two of the more prominent members of the group go by Aqua and Tank.
Lawrence circles those two in red.
You'd think, with all that info he already has, first-hand testimony of hackers stealing money, the likes of the FBI would love to know more.
Think again.
Initially, I didn't say anything because I knew it was pointless until I could much more understand the breadth and scope of this.
Pointless? Well, here's why.
At this point in time, I had already spent many years trying to be helpful with cybercrime cases. And I have to say, it was an incredibly frustrating experience. I would see a bad actor doing something, and I'd throw something over the wall to law enforcement and say, hey, I'm seeing this, you might want to check it out. You know what would happen? 99 times out of 100? Nothing.
You hear the laugh, but it's rueful. Lawrence is the kind of person who needs to know what's going on. So he talks to his sources in law enforcement.
What is going on here? Help me understand.
And he learns a cold truth.
Prosecuting cybercrime is really hard. It's massively labor intensive. It is extremely expensive. And the reality is, step one to be able to really even get a case going is that you have to know the extent of the fraud. And the aggregated loss has to be a staggering, obscene amount. Like, I'm not even talking millions, potentially tens of millions.
Officially, he says, American authorities will take on cases where the losses are $50,000 or above.
But 50,000 gets a piece of paper written on that then goes into a file somewhere, probably never to be seen again. The reality is only cases of tens of millions or even hundreds of millions are really ever going to get worked.
It's not like the cops don't care. They're just massively overwhelmed.
And maybe those hackers Lawrence is watching over, Aqua and Tank, are all too aware of that. Perhaps they know that as long as they keep their crimes on the more modest side, they'll be left well alone, in turn, making easy money.
But that still leaves a deluge of victims.
That gap between what the hackers can do and what law enforcement can handle is what provides the building blocks for an emerging criminal empire.
Every day, Lawrence Baldwin logs onto his window into the hacker's world, keeping tabs on the anonymous hackers he's come to know as Aqua and Tank. He watches on as hundreds of heists unfold in real time.
And every day, he knows no one is coming to stop it, at least anytime soon.
It was very stressful.
The victims are piling up, and Lawrence starts looking them up. He finds they're mostly made up of small businesses, which can't afford to lose a dime. He feels a duty to help them.
I'm a small business myself, and I didn't want to see them get hurt. It put me in a situation where I felt a huge sense of obligation to do anything and everything I could as quickly as I could to try to mitigate the fraud.
So he makes a decision. If the cavalry isn't coming, he's going to have to ride solo.
I was going to milk this intel for everything it had to disrupt what they were doing. And then in complete parallel to that, use everything that I knew about the constraints that law enforcement had and do everything I could to make them successful.
Step 1, warn people.
The obvious shortcut is to warn the banks directly that their clients are being robbed.
The banks, in some cases, can put a stop on transfers.
There's a dozen or more large banks in the US, but there's 18,000 small banks.
There's no way he has time to put in that many calls.
So I had no choice but to try to contact the victims directly. I would just always be very calm. I would start the conversation with,
look, I'm going to apologize in advance. This is going to be a very odd conversation. I am not going to be asking you any questions at all. I'm only going to be giving you information. Please don't hang up on me. This is what I believe has happened. Obviously, don't trust a word I'm saying, but you really need to get on the horn with your bank ASAP.
Try as he might, Lawrence just couldn't keep up with all of Zeus's victims.
Though some of them would hear the bad news directly from their banks.
We got a call from the bank and said, "Are you aware that there's no funds in this account?"
Leslie Richards ran a family business, Lieber's Luggage, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with her husband Frank.
At Lieber's Luggage, we have thousands of business cases, great gift ideas, and
The shop represented a lifetime of work.
Who started it? And was it your side of the family, Leslie?
No, Frank's side of the
Frank's
family.
side, right.
And I think his family in Cleveland started the business in the 1930s.
That's right. I started the business in 1978. It was based on a business that a family member in Cleveland, Ohio was running that led me to believe I could be successful doing the same in Albuquerque.
Then in 2009, after more than 3 decades in business, Leslie and Frank were told everything they'd worked for had gone.
What the, Excuse me? How did that happen? You know, just disbelief and horror because we had no idea what had happened. And the bank clearly didn't have any idea what had happened.
Leslie and Frank lost more than $12,000. It might sound a modest sum, but for her small family business, it was devastating.
One transaction that wiped out our checking account.
And that money then, what was that for?
That was for paying rent and buying merchandise and paying our staff members and paying insurance and taxes and health insurance. All of the things that on a day-to-day basis you need to run a business. We didn't have money in savings that we could fall back on.
This is the stuff of nightmares. You're running a business and suddenly you've got nothing. Broke, with lots of people depending on you.
For Leslie, she had 8 staff to pay, families to feed.
Then there was Leslie's mother. She'd been doing the company's books. She was mortified that this was somehow her fault.
Well, I mean, she was well into her 70s at that point, doing us a favor, but I think she thought she was responsible in some way for some period of time. So all of those feelings, the anger, the frustration, the fear.
Well, I think we knew cybercrime is a growing threat. I think it's the realities of the world, and that there are people there who don't have an ethical center. And it's very sad that that exists in the world, but I think for the history of mankind, there have been good players and bad players, and those are the bad players of our time, and it takes a lot of work to protect against them.
But that's precisely what Lawrence Baldwin is trying to do, as he hears stories like Leslie and Frank's again and again. Accounts emptied, businesses blindsided, families shaken.
And every call drives home a simple truth. He can't fight Zeus alone.
Enter Brian Krebs.
I'm an independent investigative reporter, and I write the website KrebsOnSecurity.com.
Did you know that to Krebs is now a verb? Did you know this?
I have heard that, yes.
When you get Krebsed, it means that Brian Krebs has found out everything about you and you're a cyber criminal, and suddenly the world knows your name and your face and where you're from.
In 2009, Brian was writing for The Washington Post, and he was intrigued by the sheer volume of cybercrime activity coming out of Russia. So much so that he'd started learning the language. Then an anonymous source reached out with a tip.
We started talking a lot, and yeah, I was very interested because he'd figured out a way to eavesdrop on their instant message conversations.
The source, of course, Lawrence Baldwin. The dark hero of the internet is now teaming up with someone who operates very much in the spotlight.
Lawrence shares his secret link to the hacker's chat.
I wanted to be really careful with this access because it wasn't the whole point of what I was doing was just to write sensational stories. I wanted to make it very clear to everybody running a small business that this is a very real threat, and it was pervasive. These guys were just going to town on small businesses across America.
Brian starts to live his own Zeus nightmare. He too can't immediately figure out who is running it behind the scenes.
Is it Aqua or Tank or one of the other handles he keeps seeing?
I really wanted to talk to these guys at that point. Like I really wanted to interview them and do all that, but I was just a fly on the wall.
But the victims, on the other hand, were in plain sight.
It was part of my morning routine. I would get up and make some coffee and just shuffle over to the computer and say, okay, let's see what kind of victims we have today.
Brian also calls to warn the companies he sees in the chat. His message, like Lawrence's, contact your banks quickly to stop the money going out the door.
Meanwhile, he learns two key things.
Most small business owners had no clue how exposed they were. Also, a lot of banks had never encountered this before, you know? Zeus was a game changer.
A game changer, fitting for a piece of malware named for the king of gods. In the old myths, Zeus rarely showed mortals his true form. He'd appear as a swan, a bull, or even a shower of golden rain, slipping past defenses, taking what he wanted.
The malware worked the same way. It disguised itself as something harmless, an email attachment, a link you thought you could trust.
One click, and Zeus takes his throne. Suddenly, your computer belongs to him.
The malicious software will open up a connection on their computer, a backdoor, and connect to the bad guys, at which point they'll lose their passwords.
From there, Zeus puts the hackers in control. They can use your machine as if it were their own, and you won't even know what's happening until it's too late.
It really did make it almost a pointy-clicky exercise for the fraudsters to very quickly impersonate the victim's bank.
But even gods have limits, and at times, Zeus was too successful.
Zeus infected tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of computers at once. It created a flood of stolen data. If the FBI was overwhelmed by the volume of cybercrime, hackers like Aqua and Tank were equally snowed under with the sheer volume of data they were gathering.
It's basically a hugely overwhelming problem for the miscreant, because trying to find the good stuff inside of this massive stream of fire hose of compromised information is not as easy as you would think.
Joe, help us out.
Well, think about it. Not everything a victim is doing on their hacked laptop is useful or worth anything to criminals. Hackers don't care about online shopping habits or Facebook chats. They're hunting for one thing: money, specifically bank details.
But if you say they're infecting tens of thousands of computers, maybe hundreds of thousands, then how do they find that needle in the digital haystack?
Well, the solution to this problem of too much information would give Tank, Aqua and their partners in crime their name, the Jabba Zeus crew.
Where did they get that from?
Jabba is the messaging service the hackers were using, and through which Lawrence was eavesdropping on them. And the Jabba Zeus crew's code was programmed to watch for any infected computer logging into a bank. When it did, the god spoke to the criminals through Jabba.
It would send them an instant message and say, ding, got a live one here.
But the Jabba Zeus crew didn't work alone. They recruited accomplices, something Brian Krebs came to understand.
The first story was about these guys getting into the payroll accounts of a town in Kentucky called Bullitt.
Bullitt is actually a county, a local government district, with a population at the time of about 75,000.
And it's right by Fort Knox, the home of America's gold reserve.
But the Jabba Zeus crew probably had no idea about that, and even if they did, trying to rob Fort Knox is certainly something which would get the FBI's attention, something they'd absolutely want to avoid. They were after a different prize.
Zeus had infected the computer of Bullitt's treasurer. That's the person who controls the county's cash, money coming in from taxes and going out to pay county employees.
In other words, they're the person with the key to the vault.
And the Jabba Zeus crew is now working to get that key. They hack the treasurer's computer to log into the county's bank account.
But they don't immediately empty it. There's just too much money, and robbing a local government would certainly trigger an investigation. So first, they get into the account and redirect any one-time passcodes, those extra security checks, to an email address they control.
This was crucial. Now they can get in anytime. And they've gone from controlling the treasurer's computer to controlling the county's bank account.
Next, they add a bunch of fake employees to the county payroll.
Though these people really exist in other parts of the United States.
These are people they've likely recruited online, enticed by the promise of a payday, otherwise known as money mules, who would provide a key tool for the Jabba Zeus crew.
They would add these money mules, these people, to the payroll of the companies that they'd hacked, and then they would send them a batch of payroll payments to all the new fake employees, i.e. the money mules, and those people would be asked to withdraw the money in cash from their bank and then wire it overseas to one or more people.
The Jabba Zeus crew began paying the fake Bullitt employees sums just under $10,000. It's a sum that shows the hackers' sophistication.
Because they understood that over $10,000, the transaction gets more scrutiny, more fraud controls. And by the way, there are limits to how much money that you can wire overseas in one go to one person. So they're kind of chunking it down, death by 1,000 cuts, really.
Over the next week, the fraud rolled on, quiet, invisible. Finally, someone in the Bullitt County office noticed a number that just didn't add up. They called the bank.
And by the time the bank puts a stop to it, more than $400,000 is gone.
Bullitt is bewildered. One county official tells the local paper,
"It's not like the old days when the bank got robbed and the sheriff generated up a posse and took off after the bad guys."
No, it really isn't. This is 21st century crime.
Today, even if there were a posse, they'd have no idea where to look for the criminals.
It looks like the bad guys have vanished into the digital void. But Lawrence and Brian are still on the trail.
Brian tracks down a couple of the fake employees and finds not hardened criminals, but victims themselves.
It was really heartbreaking to tell these people, look, you're part of a scam. You know, they're going to cut you loose at the end of the month. And if you participate in this, you're breaking the law, blah, blah, blah.
The fake employees, both women under the age of 35, thought they were working for a company that just needed help moving money abroad.
Each of them received almost $10,000 of Bullitt's money into their own bank accounts and were told to wire almost all of it, minus a commission, to Ukraine.
One woman began to wire the money and then thought it was suspicious and stopped.
The other went ahead, Then she found herself on the hook for the money when Bullitt's bank came calling.
Brian writes it all up in his blog, and the Washington Post hits publish.
Soon, the ripples reach all the way to Russia and to Jabba Zeus hacker, Aqua.
They describe the entire scheme. The bastards.
Literally within an hour of when he put the Bullitt County story out, we saw them chatting about it in the chat server.
They exposed the texts. They laid out the entire scheme. I'm really pissed off.
How did he know?
Tank's in on the chat too.
They were writing about us.
Yes.
Tank later writes,
Now the entire USA knows about Zeus.
And then it was cool because then I relayed that to him within minutes of when it happened. And it was like, oh my God, it's like, we are so up in their business right now. It's hilarious.
Now Lawrence and Brian know these handles, Aqua and Tank, are definitely the ones pulling the strings in these real-world heists.
They dig more, and amid the hacking talk, they find chatter about lunch, cars and holidays. And buried in this seemingly mundane gossip, there's an important detail.
They're friends, sharing some of life's most intimate moments.
So, what's going on over there?
She's giving birth. I will write later.
Okay, new dad.
During this time, Aqua and Tank both become dads, and the pair are beaming about their newborns.
But Lawrence and Brian aren't as alone as they think. Someone else has been eavesdropping on the celebrations in the Jabba Zeus chat.
And this revelation has gifted them a massive clue.
Because remember, every time a baby is born, their name is registered.
And so are the names of the parents.
The baby talk is a lead. It's a date and a time to chase.
So while Aqua and Tank celebrate new lives, halfway around the world, a much bigger cavalry than Lawrence Baldwin and Brian Krebs is saddling up.
Next time on Cyberhack, Evil Corps.
The FBI enters the scene.
Thunder, riding out to meet Thunder.
Now we know exactly who he is.
This has been episode 1 of 6 of season 3 of Cyberhack Evil Corps from the BBC World Service.
Cyberhack Evil Corps is a BBC long-form audio production for the BBC World Service. It's presented by me, Joe Tidy.
And me, Sarah Rainsford. We'd like as many people as possible to hear our stories, so please leave a rating and a review, and do tell others about Cyberhack. It really does help.
If you haven't already, don't forget to check out the previous seasons of Cyberhack, the story of the Lazarus heist. To ensure you never miss an episode, follow or subscribe to Cyberhack on BBC Sounds, or if you're outside the UK, on bbc.com. Thanks for listening.